ICO. Oh, no, we don't talk about that cover. Now that's better. ICO. ICO's legacy in the history of games is super interesting because for the most part, it kind of lives in the shadow of Team ICO's other game, Shadow of the Colossus. However, this kind of does a disservice to just how impactful this game was to the people who did play it. I mean, ICO was the game that inspired Hidetaka Miyazaki to take the plunge into making games himself. So if you think about it, the ripple effect of that one person's experience with ICO created the endless sea of Souls-like games we see now today. Although I really wish Miyazaki didn't carry over the feature from ICO where your sword clanks with the walls all the time. Yeah, could've left that one on the PS2. But anyway, there are countless other stories like that where ICO completely changed people's views on games. Even super mainstream developers have cited ICO as an inspiration. It really just goes to show how much this game stuck with people who played it, that even 20 years later, big names in the industry are still thinking about it as an inspiration to their modern games. And I can understand why. Its innovative game design philosophy broke the mold in 2001 and still feels super unique today. It'll really leave an imprint on you with its world that you can truly lose yourself in. One where the camera is always guiding your eye to gaze at its awe-inspiring visuals which confound the imagination. The otherworldly atmosphere, the mysterious island setting, and the surreal architecture of the labyrinthian castle you journey through won't leave your mind even years after playing the game. The only games that truly come close to recapturing these kinds of feelings are, well, the other games made by Team ICO. Now, most fans of Team ICO know that all the studio's games, from ICO to Shadow of the Colossus to The Last Guardian, are connected.
でタイトルを変えたのは何でかっていうと、ゲームデザイン的にあまりにも違うので、世界はつながってるんだけども、タイトルを変えて。
There's a ton of YouTube videos about this shared universe, and I even went over this connection in my video about Shadow of the Colossus, but for this analysis of ICO, I'd like to step back to the original context of this being the first game Team ICO released. I want to try and look at the deeper thematic meanings of ICO itself without drawing from other sources of lore. Except for maybe the shared universe theory I'm working on that connects the original Animal Crossing's boy with horns to the ICO universe. Okay, but seriously, there's a lot to love about ICO on its own, so let's just dive right into it, starting with a little background on the development. It really all started with the singular vision of the director, Fumito Ueda. But weirdly enough, Ueda didn't even get his start in making games. He began his career as a more traditional artist. However, something about 3D modeling and animation inspired him artistically, so in 1995, he decided to make the jump from trying to make a living as an artist to trying to break into the games industry. Ueda's unique background of going to art school and not knowing much about game development made their first job as an animator for the Sega Saturn games called D and Enemy Zero quite a struggle. However, the director of those games, Kenji Ino, said that Ueda made up for this lack of skill in development with their talent for concept, design, and artistic vision. I mean, this dude was so much more weird and artsy than most people getting into game development at the time. For example, one of Ueda's art projects was something called Tyrant Kitty, which was just an empty cage until unwitting gallery attendants peered into it, and then it would spray them with dirt, which was supposedly being kicked up by an imaginary subterranean cat. Which, yeah, I'd say that when you get stuck on an obtuse puzzle in ICO, it does feel like getting sprayed with dirt by an invisible cat when all you wanted to do was look at some cool art. So I definitely see the connection there. But anyways, after Ueda had used his weird artsy talents to break into the games industry with his work on D and Enemy Zero, he reached out to Sony, giving them a pitch that he wanted to work on a new original IP. Despite Ueda's lack of skills in game development, his artistic vision and passion led Sony to give him a shot. After being hired, Ueda spent a few months putting together a proof of concept video for what would become ICO. Sony was impressed by his work, and so they teamed Ueda up with Kenji Kaido, a veteran of the industry who was most known around that time for their work on the Tomba and Ape Escape games. This team-up provided the initial spark that allowed development to begin on ICO, but even though those two made for a good team, this was quite an ambitious and unique project. So ICO ended up having a pretty long, drawn-out development process that saw it starting off as a PS1 game all the way back in 1997. Considering ICO didn't come out until 2001 for the PS2, it's safe to say that the development process wasn't exactly straightforward. So yeah, Ueda's background in art allowed the game to have a strong and striking atmosphere even in the early prototype footage. However, considering this was his first time helming a game's development, it seems that he wasn't able to manage the process perfectly and had to pivot and change the game's direction a lot. And this happened to the point where development took 4 years and the game ended up coming out on the next generation console. Honestly though, I'm really glad ICO didn't get rushed out to be on the PS1. Although I would love the chance to see all the differences in those early PS1 builds because they look so cool. But yeah, it's clear the game needed time to mature in all aspects and that what it set out to achieve ended up fitting the PS2 much better. The benefits of the upgrade to PS2 really show in things like the lighting and shadows and the huge stunning environments which were so crucial to the atmosphere the game evokes. Although I think the benefits of the PS2 are shown most clearly in the focus on animation that ICO has. Fumito Ueda's start as an animator is probably why their games are always trying to push the envelope in pursuit of naturalistic animation when so many other games at the time cut this corner to focus on other aspects. I think this really set apart Team ICO, and it's a huge part of what makes Team ICO games so timeless. Shadow of the Colossus in particular still to this day has better and more naturalistic animation than a ton of modern big budget games. In some ways you could say the same about ICO, although some of its animation isn't quite as timeless. It admittedly has a decent bit of jank, but for its time it was really groundbreaking in a lot of ways. For example, it was the first game to make walking upstairs look kinda almost natural. Why does that look like the walk you do when you're trying to walk upstairs while skipping 2 steps each time? Okay, hear me out. It was a different time. The fact that ICO's animation reacted so that he was actually stepping on individual stairs like a person was impressive back then, I swear. And if you're not impressed, well, at least it didn't massively slow you down on stairs like so many other games. Anyways, all that to say is the development of ICO was quite unique because of the distinctive artistic perspective driving Ueda's team and their unorthodox focus on aspects of games that went overlooked by many other studios. One of the main things that made Team ICO's perspective so unique was their philosophy of designing through subtraction. They basically tried to avoid feature creep at all costs. So even if they ended up implementing something cool, if it started to muddy the waters and make the experience too convoluted or complicated, they weren't afraid to cut it from the game entirely. Now I can really relate to this because when I'm writing a script, I'll often write a first draft that rambles on way too long and has way too much going on, and then I'll edit it down to only the most interesting parts, and then Actually, you know, I'm just gonna delete this part. Anyways, you can see this design by subtraction philosophy in action very clearly by looking at footage of the early builds of ICO. At one time in development, there was a health bar and enemies other than the shadows. However, Team ICO decided that sometimes less is more. For instance, removing any HUD elements like the health bar definitely made this game more approachable for people who've never played a video game before, and also it made for a unique aesthetic experience for more experienced players. Removing those early build enemies also helps keep the themes of the game more clear and retain the mysterious atmosphere better. I'm sure there were other countless examples of this during the development of ICO, and all those refinements to the gameplay and story that many other studios would have probably viewed as throwing out completed work are what make ICO such a tightly focused and incredible game to play. This design by subtraction was taken so far to the extent that ICO has no tutorials to speak of, and the player is meant to figure out all the different ways to interact with this world by their own experimentation.
あまりマニュアルを読んだりとか深いパラメーターがたくさん出てきてそれをマネジメントするようなゲームとかやらないんですよ。なのでそのゲームを作り始める時っていうのは、まず自分がやりたいゲームを作りたいと思うので、必然的にそうなってしまうんだと思いますね。あとはそのゲームをやらない人にやってほしいっていうのがやっぱりあるので、なのでできるだけシンプル。
So for a game all about hand-holding, it really doesn't hold your hand at all. Sometimes this really works and makes you feel smart for figuring things out naturally, and I think this approach where you don't have button prompts flying at you or any complex tutorials to read can be great for people new to games. However, sometimes crucial mechanics are just not taught through gameplay as intended and aren't that obvious. For example, I didn't know you could swing on chains until really far into the game, and yeah, this mechanic isn't even in the manual. I checked. Furthermore, the original PS2 American version of the game has no hints for puzzle solutions that might have helped you out in situations where you get stuck like that. What they tried to do to compensate was to have the fixed angles of the camera fill in that role, and often they will do a great job of pointing you in the direction of solutions or where you should be going and looking next. Yet sometimes the camera angle ends up hiding information you need to even think of a possible solution until you wander around aimlessly and stumble upon that hidden information. This can definitely lead to getting stuck at certain points in the game for minutes on end. When I got stumped and had to use a guide, I always felt like I would have never figured that out because nothing had taught me to consider that option and my curiosity had been led down other paths. So yeah, if you're the kind of player who hates getting stuck on puzzles, I'd recommend either playing the PS3 release or the PS2 European or Japanese versions of the game, because Yorda will often help point you towards some of the more obtuse elements of puzzles that you might miss. Or just don't be afraid to use a guide if you're stuck for more than 10 minutes. Yeah, so at times ICO can kinda be frustrating, especially when the combat has run its course and gotten repetitive. However, for most of the game when those elements aren't present, it's really one of my favorite games to play. Its puzzles are really well designed, the platforming mechanics are satisfying when you get the hang of them, and its world is really fun to explore. It's really impressive that they pulled all this off while keeping the mechanics so focused and simple. The design by subtraction philosophy that led to this working so well wasn't just applied to the gameplay though, it's also present in the deceptively simple plot. The story of ICO might come off as pretty bare bones at first glance. On the surface, it feels like a straightforward fairy tale with your typical medieval fantasy type setting. You know, with knights and queens and all that kind of stuff, where a boy goes on an adventure with a princess to escape a castle. We find ourselves in this scenario because our main character ICO is one of the few boys in his village born with horns. Due to this difference, he's societally ostracized, and so at the opening of the game, he's brought to the mysterious castle to be sacrificed to its equally enigmatic ruler, the Queen. By chance, the casket ICO is placed in breaks, and so ICO makes his way through the castle, running into the Queen's daughter, Yorda, who's locked in a cage. The Queen has Yorda trapped here because she wants to eventually possess Yorda's body and use it as a vessel because the Queen's own body is deteriorating. ICO doesn't know any of this, but he feels compelled to help Yorda anyway, so he breaks Yorda out of her cage and then together they strive to escape the labyrinthian castle. Along the way, fighting shadowy beings sent by the Queen and solving puzzles to try and open the main gate out of the castle. And so that's really the whole story besides the ending, which I'll get into more later, but yeah, it's a pretty simple and easy to understand framework that uses a lot of archetypical fairy tale elements. However, this easily digestible plot and setting progressively evolve quite deeply as the game goes on. As the surface level of ICO's story fades into the background, the odd and surreal elements of this world will start to catch your eye more and more, and eventually you'll start to see the profound thematic depth that lies beneath the deceptively simple plot. There are so many themes to explore, and you really have to look at all the aspects of the game together to get the whole sense of the story. It's not just the plot beats and the few lines of dialogue the characters say. A lot of the story is deeply affected by the player's actions, the sound design and music, and the atmosphere established by its otherworldly setting. Right now, let's dive a little deeper into that setting, because it plays a much larger role than you might expect, and it's a good thing it does because there's only one cohesive setting in the entire game. You spend all of ICO up until the credits roll, exploring and solving puzzles inside the walls of a surreal castle that defies all logic. The architecture of the castle is physically impossible in terms of its structure in a lot of ways. It's much too large for the island it's on, and it's falling to ruins in an odd way that feels like it's meant to reflect the Queen's deteriorating state. Considering the unfathomable construction of the castle, it's likely it was built in large part with the Queen's strange magic powers. So now that those powers are waning, so are the walls of the castle. The imposing and dark presence of the Queen is also reflected in the castle. Its endless dingy, dark, and oppressive atmospheres are only broken by the crackle of torchlight and the occasional brief moments of beautiful nature. This feels similar to the Queen's visual design. She's basically an unnerving shroud of darkness with small sections of light peeking out to show that there's still some sort of light beneath her shadowy demeanor. So this one-to-one connection makes it make a little more sense that even though the Queen is the villain, she's rarely directly seen. And what you truly spend most of the game grappling with is the maze-like castle itself. So yeah, like you do fight the queen at the end after not seeing her for most of the game, but it still weirdly feels built up to, because despite not having her on screen much, in a way you were getting to know her abstractly through exploring this castle that represents her. And Team ICO knew very well how crucial getting to know this environment was to this story. ICO is designed basically to force you to become familiar with every inch of this castle to progress. It then rewards that familiarity by showing you places in the distance you recognize that build your spatial orientation, to the point where at the end of the game you really know this place inside and out. As you explore, the castle's mysterious and surreal nature will draw you in further and further, to the point where you'll start to notice the little details about this world that really get you invested in the plot. For example, the idol statues house small stone horned boys in the center of them. If you end up noticing this, you'll start to wonder about how the sacrifice of the horned boys might be connected to the mysterious powers running through these idol statues. And if you've ever game overed by losing Yorda to the shadows, you'd see ICO get turned to stone. So that'll get you thinking about how these idol statues might literally be other kids like you who were turned to stone and are trapped in these idol statues. Yeah, I see why this game has a T rating now, that's dark. Then there's also strange things about the small patches of nature in the castle. Like you'll start to ask yourself, why are doves the only living creatures here? This might make you think back to how Yorda was trapped in what looked like a bird cage at the beginning. Could these birds be meant to clue you into the fact that this entire castle is just a larger bird cage designed to keep Yorda trapped? These small details can really get you thinking about big themes, like why don't the birds use their power to escape the desolate castle and fly to more lush forests? Metaphorically, this could be connected to how Yorda seems to have access to mysterious powers, but presumably hasn't used the full extent of these powers to try and escape before meeting ICO. The fact that Yorda really takes an interest in these birds if you let her wander off by herself makes me feel like there's gotta be an intentional thematic connection there even more. All these careful design decisions and attention to detail really help sell the atmosphere that's so important to why ICO is so fun to play. And the way these things make your mind wander manages to get you further invested in the story purely with architectural design and environmental details. For most of the game, all that accompanies this environment is hollow and lonely ambient noise, only sometimes briefly warmed by the crackling of torches. Though as you progress, you'll start to be in outdoor environments more often, which are more peaceful than the dingy castle interiors. That being said, a slight tinge of dread reminding you that you're still trapped in the castle permeates these areas too. The extended periods of silence in these slightly eerie environments is a big part of what makes the few times when the game does use sound to drive home the emotion of certain moments so effective. For example, the feeling of relief you feel when you reach an idol statue gate as a swarm of shadows are chasing you is amplified so well by the euphoric ambient tones that accompany this moment. These brief little interlude songs are the perfect reward, a brief calm respite from the oppressive, quiet atmosphere of the castle. It's a memorable highlight of your progression and makes you feel just enough at ease to be able to continue on. These are just the little snippet songs though. The full-on musical numbers are reserved extremely sparingly for only the few incredibly important moments near the beginning and end of the game. Now, the very first moments of the game still have barely any music, just dark ambient tones that set an off-kilter mood as ICO is being brought to the castle to be sacrificed. However, this dark and lonely mood is being set up perfectly so that after your first few minutes alone in this lonely space, you'll feel immense relief when you meet Yorda. The first real full song of the game plays here, and its angelic ambient choirs and calming guitars soothe you while simultaneously prodding your curiosity. Without the build-up that lacked music, this moment wouldn't hit so hard, and this technique is used a few more times really effectively throughout the game to elicit this kind of calming effect. The most memorable music for a lot of people though would be at the end of the game where the exact opposite occurs. An incredibly sorrowful song plays where you're forced to fight countless spirits of other horned boys in order to save Yorda. tragedy apparent in this song and the long drawn-out nature of the battle will make sure the thematic meanings of this moment won't go unnoticed, and we'll get more into that later. All the songs express so much with just their tone and instrumentation, but there's actually a song with lyrics at the very end. It plays after you defeat the queen and the castle crumbles, and it has a much more explicit message. The lyrics to this song called You Were There are pretty incomprehensible when just listening regularly, but I highly recommend looking them up because there's some really cool themes expressed in them. The first thing I started to notice about the lyrics is that they seem like they're sung from Yorda's perspective. The song feels like she's lamenting her fate of not being able to escape the castle and being trapped there in the ruins in an endless dream. She nostalgically remembers the paradoxically oppressive and beautiful atmosphere. She sings about holding dear the moments where you were there, the moments spent in happiness with seasons lit in gold. Because you were there, you were able to throw a wrench into the endless cycle of the Queen/Yorda dynamic. Even though you might not have been able to save Yorda in the end, at least you were able to be the sole witness to this history. You were able to presumably end the cycle of sorrow by defeating the queen and having the castle crumble. So she refers to you as the sole key to this mystery. There's more to examine with the lyrics to this song for sure, and I haven't seen them discussed in many eco analysis videos I've seen, so definitely let me know your thoughts on them in the comments. My favorite song on the soundtrack though is definitely the track called Heal, which is the theme that plays when you sit on the save couches. It beautifully captures the tenderness of the two friends having a moment to sit and rest with each other after going through so much. It's such a sweet reward to reach a save point and hear this calming melody after finally beating a tough puzzle. Without fail, I would always spend just a little bit of extra time just sitting there listening after I was done saving, resting my mind just like ICO and Yorda were doing. This cuteness of Yorda and ICO napping together at the save couches was definitely something that made me grow more fond of Yorda and grew the feeling of companionship that's really key to ICO. That feeling is especially necessary to have for what the devs were trying to pull off with the gameplay. I mean, basically the entire game is an escort mission, so they had to really make you care about Yorda for it to work at all. I personally can't stand escort missions. On my first time playing Resident Evil 4 when I was 12, I quit the game right after I got Ashley because I was so frustrated with the escort mechanics. Of course, I've gone back now and beaten RE4 and loved it, but that experience almost made me miss out on one of my favorite games ever. So it's really kind of amazing how ICO used this almost universally hated mechanic for the core of ICO's gameplay and somehow made it work. I think the reason why it works is that the connection you build with Yorda over the game is so much more real than most other characters you would escort in other games. Building this connection with Yorda was really so effective because of how much Team ICO focused on the unique aspects of games as a medium in order to build empathy for its characters through gameplay.
物語表現をできるメディアっていうのはいくつかありますよね。その映画であったり小説であったり、音楽もそうなのかもしれないですけど、そのビデオゲームが他のその物語表現ができるメディアと比較して、どこが優れてるかというと、やっぱりその感情移入をさせて
You never really feel like helping Yorda is a chore or that she's holding you back because you also need Yorda's help. When you're playing through the game, if you didn't have Yorda, you wouldn't even be able to make it past the first idol statue gate or any of the other puzzles requiring Yorda's involvement. Also, in terms of combat, you empathize with Yorda's helplessness because of how helpless it can feel to control ICO sometimes. Like, ICO can really easily get knocked around where you can't do anything for a few seconds and you're totally helpless. Also, there's the fact that you're just this small kid fighting swarms of hulking shadow monsters with just a stick. It makes you really want to protect Yorda because you can put yourself in the shoes of someone who's even more helpless in this situation. That empathy and connection with Yorda is one of the main things raising the tension in these combat scenarios, and because of that, your heart will really start to race when Yorda gets taken from you. All that being said, Yorda isn't totally helpless when it comes to combat though. If you can manage to get her to activate an idol statue gate while dodging all the enemies chasing you, all the shadows will instantly be defeated. So in some ways, Yorda is even more powerful than ICO, furthering the idea that this isn't exactly the damsel in distress type of scenario some might assume it to be, but instead it's more of a story of a symbiotic companionship. I mean, we know ICO really needs Yorda because they put in a mechanic where ICO runs ever so slightly faster when calling out to Yorda when they're separated. While it's kind of unintentionally hilarious that yelling makes you go fast, it's really pretty neat that they went to the trouble of having ICO and Yorda's codependency be expressed in such a easily missable gameplay mechanic. Because of all these different things, emphasizing ICO and Yorda's codependent relationship dynamic, you end up empathizing with Yorda way more than you might expect at first because you're not just leading around a helpless person with no thoughts of their own. Yorda has lived in captivity all her life, so yeah, she doesn't understand a lot of things and needs your help to navigate the castle, but she does have her own strength, personality traits, and motivations aside from just being a blank slate you move from point A to B. For example, if you leave her alone for a while, she's likely to show her curious side and wander around the castle, often interacting with the birds. Also, sometimes when entering an area key to your escape, she'll get excited to get there and will run in before you, hinting at her own drive to escape the castle and that you aren't just leading her around blindly. Also, in the Japanese and European releases of ICO, which are pretty much considered the definitive versions, at certain points in the game, Yorda will help guide you towards the elements of the puzzles you might be likely to miss. So while playing the game, all these aspects to interacting with Yorda help make her feel alive and make it much easier for the player to build a connection with this character when compared to any other character I've had to guide in escort missions in other games. Another big part of why ICO's escort mechanics work when other games fail is that this relationship is not only at the center of the gameplay, but it's also deeply embedded into the emotional core of the narrative. It's really powerful to see ICO strive so hard to help someone they don't really know and can't even understand. This is really one of the more touching themes in the story. ICO is someone who's been ostracized all their life by people who didn't understand their horns and cast them out of their society because they were different. So it's really sweet to see ICO's morals stand so firmly against that kind of ideology by risking everything to help Yorda. I mean, they can't even understand anything Yorda says, and they still just immediately feel that they need to help them. Yorda also mirrors these traits, and she takes a leap of faith by trusting and helping ICO too, despite that she also couldn't understand him, and I think that dynamic really added a special element to what's being expressed through their relationship.
やっぱ言葉が通じないっていうものを表現するためにあえて字幕は読めないようにしたってところが一番大きいですね。
ICO's desire to help others actually ends up influencing some of the bigger themes in the narrative, and it's a big part of what drives the plot forward. Maybe ICO's desire to help others is so strong because no one ever helped him, which isn't the most uncommon trait for a hero of a story. However, what I love about this is the way Team ICO actually used this rather expected character trait in an unexpected way when it comes to the twist at the end of the game that totally flips the whole morality of the situation on its head. The first thing the game does to prime you for this twist at the end is to separate you from Yorda, and after building a bond for the whole game, you legitimately end up missing Yorda in this endgame section. Without her, you no longer have any brief moments of relief on the save couches, and the huge empty environments of this section further serve to highlight just how alone you are. Also, there are no more moments of beautiful green nature, and there's a far more drab color palette here. In particular, I really like the moments on the cliffside bathed in rainfall that do a really good job of immersing you in a feeling of loneliness and the mindset of missing Yorda. All this sets it up perfectly so that whenever you do find Yorda again, you'll be ready to do whatever to save them. And so at the end of this comfortless section where you're alone, you get the Queen's sword and head over to the sacrifice room where you started the game in to find Yorda. But she's been turned to stone and surrounded by shadows who resemble ICO's silhouette. In an attempt to save her, ICO has to attack all the spirits surrounding Yorda. But as you do, you'll see their energy returning to the caskets, basically confirming that these shadows are all formed from the other horned boys who were sacrificed just like you. You'll likely first go into this fight guns blazing, ready to take down all the shadows to protect Yorda like you have been the whole game. However, the somber music and the fact that the shadows aren't fighting back at all will eventually start to make you think twice about the whole situation. I think the fact that you're attacking the Horned Boys with a weapon called the Queen's Sword is meant to emphasize the role reversal of this moment. ICO's unflinching desire to help Yorda has pushed him to do things that are morally questionable and cause suffering to the spirits of the Horned kids who do nothing but try to run away from you. This moment is likely to make you reflect on the other black spirits you've fought and how they were likely once Horned kids too. You might start to think back about how they never attacked ICO unless you threatened them first, and that they really only focused on taking Yorda if you ignored them. The shadow seemed really scary in appearance at first and knocked you around quite a bit, but over the course of the game you'll realize that once you get the hang of the combat, the shadows actually aren't able to permanently damage you at all, and they're being relatively easily defeated by a 12-year-old with a wood plank. So yeah, maybe in your tunnel vision to help Yorda and with your anger towards the Queen clouding your vision, you might have ignored all the possible implications of your actions this whole time. Was there a way to help all the spirits of the Horned kids that you overlooked? Did attacking them get rid of any chance of bringing them back? We'll never truly know. This is just one of those amazingly executed, morally ambiguous moments that Team ICO fans love Team ICO so much for. This moment of the game also might help you start to question the morals of all the other characters. You might start to put yourself in the shoes of the villagers who sacrificed you. You'll think back to how the knights who brought you to the castle in the beginning seem slightly apologetic or regretful that they've brought themselves to do this horrible act. They might just have been trying to protect themselves from the Queen's wrath by sacrificing you and the other Horned kids, and they use societal ostracization and othering to justify it to themselves. So when you are trying to protect yourself and Yorda from the Queen's wrath and end up needing to destroy all the spirits of the Horned kids who were just like you, it really adds a layer of ambiguity and introspection to all the themes of the game. You likely judged these shadowy beings as purely evil entities just based on their appearance at first, just like how ICO was judged on the appearance of his horns. It's a genius twist on the morality of the story that's only able to be this effective in the medium of a video game where you really feel the sense of regret because you as the player are the one who had to do these questionable actions. So yeah, ICO masterfully uses the immersive qualities of video games as a medium to make you really feel the moral ambiguity of the actions you decide to take and to make you feel empathy for its characters. Those aspects of the game also end up being super important to make the emotional struggle between Yorda and the Queen hit really hard. Their relationship is one of the darker parts of ICO and how it brings in themes of abusive parental relationships. The Queen refers to Yorda as her beloved daughter, but she treats her as just a tool to be used. It's actually ambiguous if Yorda is legitimately the Queen's daughter or if she was created through the Queen's power or something, but thematically it makes sense to just take it at face value that the Queen at least views Yorda as a daughter figure and Yorda views her as a mother figure. All that being said, the Queen uses this authoritative role as Yorda's mother in a twisted way to try and frame her possessive control over Yorda as Yorda being beloved to her. Obviously, this is a facade though, since she keeps her in captivity, presumably her whole life, just to be able to use her body as a vessel. This plot point about Yorda's body being used as a vessel so that Yorda will literally become the Queen could be seen as representing how abusive behaviors often get passed down to kids, who then become like their parents and reenact these unhealthy dynamics in the relationship with their own kids later in life. In ICO, it's represented as the Queen literally taking over Yorda's body, but I think it works on a metaphorical level like this, considering all the other ways the Queen and Yorda's relationship represents some typical dynamics of abusive relationships. For instance, the first time the Queen appears at the moment when Yorda and ICO make it so close to escaping, she tells Yorda, "Why can't you understand? You cannot survive in the outside world." Which feels like a classic manipulator technique. It's the combo of "you can't survive without me" and the "I know what's best for you" moves. But if Yorda legitimately can't survive outside the castle and the Queen needs her as a vessel, then why doesn't the Queen just stop the two in their tracks here? Well, some may speculate that the Queen is toying with the pair to teach them a lesson and allowing them to try to escape just to see them fail. Personally, I think it's more likely because the Queen is losing her power rapidly, which is the whole reason she needs to keep Yorda in the castle. She doesn't forcefully stop the two of them at this cutscene by the gate because here near the castle border, she isn't able to produce the same amount of power she does in the final boss battle. When she isn't in close proximity to the sacrificial caskets, which are presumably the source of her power, all she can manage is to teleport around and send out the shadows. So at this point, she might not actually be able to physically stop Yorda escaping, so the queen is trying to stop Yorda by messing with her head. The queen might even be afraid to directly confront Yorda for other reasons too. If you think about it, the sword ICO uses to defeat the queen draws its power from the mysterious light magic that opens the idol statue gates. Yorda can also open those idol statue gates with her similar looking light magic. So it's possible the queen is scared of Yorda's magic and isn't powerful enough to stop Yorda directly until later in the game when Yorda has already been weakened by using a ton of magic to open the main gate and getting shocked by the towers. All this leads me to believe that the queen has been relying on threats and manipulation to keep Yorda thinking that escape is impossible. This mental control would explain why even the appearance of the queen messes with Yorda's head so much that she falls to the ground and becomes weak the first time the queen appears, even though the queen doesn't do anything directly to cause this physically. So yeah, this manipulative and controlling dynamic in the relationship is definitely an important theme, and it's something that's explored further in a really interesting way pretty subtly at the beginning and end of the game. In the beginning, Yorda appears drenched in black, just like the queen, when ICO sees a vision of Yorda in the cage. Then again at the end, Yorda is covered in this mysterious black magic when the power of the sacrificial caskets is activated, and Yorda uses the power that this gives her to save ICO from the crumbling castle. The game has conditioned us through the queen and the shadow creatures to assume these dark powers can only be used for evil things. But Yorda was enveloped in this darkness at the beginning of the game, and we know Yorda isn't evil, so there has to be more to it. So at the end, when Yorda, whose being is seemingly taken over by this power, chooses to use it to do something good, this could symbolize Yorda breaking the chain of abuse. Even though she can't escape how her mother has affected her, and she might end up taking on some of her mother's traits, symbolized by the darkness enveloping her just like it did the queen, that doesn't mean she can't be conscious of that influence and choose to do good. It kind of makes you wonder if the queen was once just like Yorda and was forced to become a vessel too. Without companionship like Yorda had with ICO, she would have had much less of a chance to break the chain and would inevitably fall into the role that was forced onto her. But this ending scene of the castle crumbling isn't the last we see of Yorda and ICO. After washing up on a calming beach, ICO finds Yorda there, no longer covered in black, and the real end of the game is marked by Yorda saying something in her language that, as far as I know, hasn't been translated to this day. There's always just one more mystery to this game, isn't there? This is all very surreal because Yorda was pretty unambiguously buried in the crumbling castle, so it begs the question, is this a dream of ICO's? Did the mysterious magic save Yorda and teleport her here? It's really a head scratcher.
意味があるとすればイコの夢ですよね。終わって、本当はあそこで終わりなんだけど、船の中で寝てるイコが見てる夢。
Okay, well, so Ueda said that he intended it to be a dream of ICO's, wishing to see Yorda one more time, but he also admitted that that's just one interpretation. I think the intention of this scene being a dream is felt in the fact that the ending does have this mysterious quality, and it makes you want to play the game again to see if Yorda really did survive or if this is just a dream. It's like this perfect little bit of mystery mixed with hope right at the end that invites the player to fight the inevitability of Yorda becoming the queen's vessel and being trapped in the castle. Seeing Yorda human again like this makes you feel like maybe you can get the happy ending you want, and if you just do things a little differently on your next playthrough, maybe you'll get to see some other less ambiguous secret happy ending. This brief, hopeful moment on the beach makes you remember your connection to Yorda and why you fought so hard to try and save her. It's truly effective in making you want to replay the game again just to fight that inevitable sad ending, but the thing is, there is no alternate, truly unambiguous happy ending. Maybe because they felt kinda bad about this sad cycle a player might find themselves in, they decided to at least give you another sweet moment where you can share watermelon on the beach with Yorda when they updated the game for Japan and Europe. Now, I've mentioned that update to the game through the Japanese and European release a few times in the video, but what about the version differences in the very first taste people had with ICO? I'm talking about the demo that was released with PlayStation Magazine. There's a few fun differences here worth mentioning. Right off the bat, it's kind of funny that they spelled Yorda's name as Yorda. Like, I guess they thought people would pronounce it like a Scandinavian J and assume it's said as Yorda, I don't know. Then there's a bunch of very small tweaks to make some things easier and simpler, like Yorda's cage being already lowered at the beginning, or the fact that ICO just spawns out of the casket with a stick already in hand. Hey, maybe one of the knights wanted ICO to have something to entertain himself with while he was stuck in that casket, who knows. One of the things I'm super glad they changed for the full game is that in the demo, you have the option to let go of Yorda's hand when catching her when she jumps. This was removed to prevent players from being cruel to Yorda, and thank God, because it would have totally soured the vibe of ICO and Yorda's companionship if you could still do this. Now, this demo was promoted on the front cover of this edition of PlayStation Magazine with the tagline, "The best game you've never heard of." And it's kind of funny how 20 years later, people still use variations of that as article headlines or YouTube video titles. It just goes to show that ICO was hitting those hidden gem vibes, even back when it was just a demo. Playing this demo is actually what inspired the author Miyuki Miyabe to want to write a novelization of ICO. She was told to interpret the lore and story however she wanted, and all the new additions and changes were pretty well received by fans for the most part. The core of the story remains pretty much the same, but the lore and world are greatly expanded upon. In particular, Yorda's character gets much more fleshed out, and the backstories of all the characters and the castle itself are explored in much more depth. It's considered non-canonical, and it's really just a neat little extra bonus for ICO fans, but I really love the idea that this game with so little dialogue had such a rich atmosphere that it inspired an author to write a 500+ page book. It just further goes to show how much this game really sticks with people and makes their mind wonder about its intentionally vague and open to interpretation story. The ethereal atmosphere that surrounds its world and characters has kept my thoughts drifting back to it time and time again. It only took me around 6 hours to beat this game for the first time, but I then spent dozens of hours pondering what it was that I just experienced. On my repeat playthroughs, I found my imagination being equally inspired to keep digging further into every corner of this world. The game basically taught me to do this through its gameplay that had me exploring every corner of the castle. And you know what? I'm still not done exploring every little detail of this intriguing story. I think this is just one of those games my mind will keep drifting back to for years on end. ICO is just one of those pieces of art that I simply can't stop thinking about. Okay, thanks so much for watching to the end of the video, and definitely tell me about all of your interpretations of ICO's story in the comments, because I'm sure I failed to cover some of people's favorite parts of the game. One thing in particular I couldn't quite put my finger on exactly is the thematic symbolism of ICO losing his horns after fighting the queen, but I know there's something there, so let me know your thoughts. Also, let me know of any other games or other media that you can't stop thinking about that would make for a good long-form analysis style video like this. Anyways, I hope you have a good day, and if by chance you're listening to this while running late, remember that you can always run slightly faster by yelling, so just start screaming "Oi" like ICO, and trust me, you'll make it there on time.
Bonus stage!
So I kept seeing this link to i-c-o.net on promotional pictures of ICO on the fan wiki page, and I just got so curious as to what i-c-o.net could have been. Clicking the link nowadays just redirects you to the Japanese Sony website for Team ICO games. However, I couldn't just leave it there, so I hopped on the Wayback Machine and took a look at the crumbling ruins of this awesome early 2000s website. Okay, cool, so this might take a while to get through because the whole site's in Japanese. Although I do love how the only English you see on this site is the header saying ICO PlayStation 2, the best. I agree. I-c-o.net has so much of that weird old website charm to it. I love the UI elements and the unorthodox way things are laid out. The actual content behind those UI elements are a treasure trove of old ICO promotional materials and little write-ups about the game. You've got everything from the lowest resolution promo videos I've ever seen, to interviews with Ueda and other staff, to this cool gif of the casket glowing, to paper printouts you can cut out and fold to make some of the objects and characters from the game, which is neat. No, really, it's super neat. I tried making all of these and I had a great time, except ICO and Yorda looked a little,
Can anybody tell me just what I did wrong?
There's tons more here to explore, and I really recommend you do if you're a super fan. Unfortunately, I can't seem to get to some of the website's elements because they require Flash, which is really a shame. Definitely let me know in the comments if you find any other cool stuff on this site, or if you end up unearthing some other old weird Team Eco site, because I love this kind of stuff. Okay, that's it for the little bonus bit. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a good one.